Have you ever wished you could live in another time? To walk the streets of ancient cities and see civilizations being born? The ancient Near East, the cradle of writing, law, and empire. It was a land of majestic ziggurats and powerful kings, men who claimed they were handing down divine justice, their names carved into clay tablets that promised order. But what if that order was built on a foundation of absolute terror? What if, for the subjects of a certain kind of ruler, justice wasn't blind, it was starving? Beneath the surface of civilization, a much darker reality was stirring. This was a world where power was absolute, and cruelty was a tool, sharpened to a razor's edge. Today, we're investigating the brutal world of ancient justice to uncover an archetype of tyranny, a ruler who used our most primal fear as his ultimate weapon. This isn't just a story about ancient laws. It's about how a simple crime, a muttered word of protest, or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time could lead to the slowest, most agonizing death you can imagine. This is the story of how a tyrant could weaponize hunger. To understand this special kind of cruelty, you have to understand the world that created it. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was a place of incredible innovation. This is where humanity first built cities, wrote down laws, and charted the stars. But it was also a place where life was incredibly fragile, balanced on a knife's edge between feast and famine. A drought could turn fertile land into cracked earth, wiping out a harvest and plunging entire regions into despair. War was a constant threat, as empires like Assyria and Babylonia smashed against each other for power. And when armies marched, they brought a weapon far more sinister than any sword or spear: the siege. An army would surround a city, cut off its food supply, and turn its defensive walls into the walls of a prison. In this world, hunger wasn't just a personal problem. It was a collective terror. It was seen as a sign of chaos, a punishment from the gods. Ancient texts, including the Hebrew Bible, are filled with curses that speak of divine wrath appearing as famine, where people would plant but never harvest and eat but never feel full. This fear was baked into the culture. A starving population meant the cosmic order itself was broken. Most rulers would see a famine as a crisis, a sign they'd failed to please the gods. But for a certain kind of tyrant, this primal fear wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. He could look at the gaunt faces of the hungry and not see desperation, but a blueprint for control. He understood that the man who can give or withhold bread holds the ultimate power. He didn't just rule over his people. He ruled over their most basic need to survive. And with that, he could invent a punishment more psychologically devastating than any quick execution. In the ancient world, punishment was a show. Justice didn't just have to be done, it had to be seen. The famous Code of Hammurabi was filled with brutal, physical penalties. An eye for an eye. For theft, a man might lose his hand. For adultery, a woman could have her nose cut off. These punishments were bloody, visceral, and, importantly, quick. They were meant to shock people into behaving. So why would any ruler choose starvation? Why pick a method that could take days, even weeks, to reach its grim finale? The answer is in the unique psychology of this torture. A beheading is over in a moment. Starvation, that's a process. It's a slow, methodical erasure of a person. It punishes the body, but it's a direct assault on the mind. We know from modern studies that starvation causes a horrifying psychological breakdown. It starts with an all-consuming obsession with food, which spirals into depression, apathy, irritability, and the loss of what makes us human. The victim is stripped of their humanity long before their heart gives out. A tyrant who uses this understands it all too well. He isn't just killing a criminal, he's making a statement. A public execution shows the state's power over death. A public starvation shows the state's power over life itself. It's the ultimate flex, a chilling message to anyone else thinking of stepping out of line. Every hunger pang the victim feels is a testament to the ruler's reach. It's a walking, breathing, slowly dying advertisement for obedience. Now, while laws specifically sentencing people to starve for minor crimes are rare in the historical record, which favored fines or mutilation, the tools for this kind of death were there. A long prison sentence in a filthy cell, what one ancient letter called a house of distresses or famine, could get the job done. But for those he truly wanted to make an example of, a tyrant had far more direct methods in his playbook. Picture a bustling city square in ancient Mesopotamia. The air is thick with the smell of spices and the sound of merchants haggling. But right in the center, there's a new attraction. It's a crude iron cage, and inside is a man you know. Maybe he was a farmer who questioned a crippling tax. Maybe a potter who spoke too loudly about the king in a tavern. His crime wasn't treason or murder. It was insolence. And his sentence is to become a living ghost. He isn't beaten. He isn't mutilated. He's just left there. At first, he might shout, rattling the bars, yelling about his innocence or cursing the king. But soon, the first gnawing pains of hunger start. The strength for outrage fades, replaced by a desperate, animal need. The whole world shrinks to the size of his empty stomach. Everyone is forced to walk past him every single day. They see his clothes turn to rags, his eyes sink into his skull. They watch his pleas for food turn to whimpers, and then to nothing. He becomes a fixture of the city, a gaunt specter whose very presence is a constant, unspoken warning. Asterisk, this is what happens when you step out of line. This is the price of one defiant word, asterisk. The psychological impact would be immense. It's one thing to hear about an execution. It's another thing to watch a man slowly decay for weeks. The children who see him would learn fear before they understood law. The merchants would learn to hold their tongues. The soldiers would see a grim reminder of their master's absolute power. This method, a blend of public humiliation and deprivation, turns the victim into a state-sponsored horror show. His body is no longer his own. It's a canvas for the tyrant's masterpiece of terror. He isn't just being punished, he's being unmade, piece by agonizing piece, for all to see. The history of power is often written in the language of cruelty. If you find this dive into the dark strategies of ancient rulers compelling, and you want to uncover more stories that the history books tend to leave out, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming up. If the public cage was a spectacle for the masses, there was another, more intimate horror reserved for threats a ruler wanted to simply disappear. This punishment is known as immurement, and it's one of the most terrifying forms of execution ever dreamed up. The name literally means to wall in, and that's exactly what it was. The victim, maybe a political rival, a disgraced priest, or part of a failed plot, would be taken to a small chamber built into a palace wall or a city gate. No chains, no torture devices. The victim would be forced inside, and then, brick by brick, the entrance was sealed. Imagine the final moments. The last sliver of light vanishes. The final scrape of the mason's trowel echoes in the sudden, total darkness. And then silence. Unlike being buried alive, where you'd suffocate pretty quickly, immurement was engineered for prolonged agony. The space was just big enough to breathe. The real executioner was time. Alone in the pitch black, the victim was left to face the slow creep of thirst and starvation. The mind, starved of any sensory input, would likely break down, tormented by hallucinations. Days would bleed into one another. Hope would evaporate. The only reality left would be the gnawing emptiness in the gut. This practice is chillingly documented in other cultures. In ancient Rome, Vestal virgins who broke their vows of chastity were entombed alive. The practice is also noted in Persia. It was a punishment that carried a special kind of terror because it was a sentence of total erasure. The victim wasn't just killed. They were removed from the world, their tomb invisible, their final resting place a silent, solid wall. It sent a clear message to the ambitious. The ruler can not only end your life, he can wipe away the very proof you ever existed. The cage punished one person. The wall entombed a rival. But for a tyrant with epic ambition, there was a way to use starvation on a massive scale to punish tens of thousands at once. This was the terror of siege warfare. Depriving people of food has been a tactic of war forever. But the great empires of the ancient Near East, especially the Assyrians, perfected it into a ruthless science. When an Assyrian king wanted to take a fortified city, his first move wasn't always a bloody assault. It was to build a wall around their wall. His army would encircle the city, creating a barrier nothing could get through. They'd strip the surrounding farmlands bare. The city, once a symbol of safety, became a massive, open-air prison. Then, the king would just wait. And inside the walls, a predictable and horrific drama would begin. First came rationing. The wealthy might survive for a while on their stored food, but for the poor, hunger hit fast. As weeks turned into months, desperation took over. The price of food shot through the roof. Biblical accounts of the siege of Samaria describe a donkey's head, normally considered unclean, being sold for a fortune. Next, society would collapse. People ate their livestock, then their pets. They boiled leather to try to get some sustenance. The darkest accounts from ancient sieges tell of people eating grass, insects, and even dove's dung. And finally, the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. As starvation drove people mad, they turned on each other. The Book of Lamentations describes compassionate women cooking their own children to survive the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. This was the complete breakdown of civilization, engineered from outside the walls. For the tyrant laying siege, this was a perfect weapon. It weakened the enemy army without him losing his own soldiers. It inflicted a terrible punishment that broke the people's will to fight, and it was terrifying propaganda for any other city that might think of defying him. Starvation wasn't just a consequence of war. It was the primary engine of conquest. The ancient Near East was a competitive market for cruelty. While Mesopotamian rulers perfected deprivation, their rivals in neighboring Persia were allegedly creating punishments with a truly disgusting level of ingenuity. If you thought starving to death was the limit, you need to hear about scaphism, also known as the boats. Our main account of this comes from the Greek writer Plutarch. And while some historians debate if it really happened on a wide scale, the description alone is pure nightmare fuel. The victim would be taken to a swamp and placed inside a narrow boat or hollowed-out log. Then, a second boat was sealed over them, creating a coffin with only their head, hands, and feet sticking out. Then, the real torture began. They would force-feed the person a mixture of milk and honey. This wasn't mercy. The goal was to cause violent diarrhea that would fill the container they were trapped in. They would also smear the victim's face and limbs with more honey, attracting every fly and stinging insect in the area. So, the victim was left trapped, floating on stagnant water under the hot sun. They were slowly being eaten alive from the outside by bugs drawn to the honey, and from the inside by worms that would breed in the filth. The daily force feeding was designed to prolong the agony, preventing a quick death from dehydration. Plutarch claims one victim of scaphism lasted for 17 days before he finally died. Whether scaphism was a common practice or just a creative piece of anti-Persian propaganda, the story shows the horrifying imagination that went into punishments in the ancient world. It proves that the methods we've talked about existed in a wider culture of extreme cruelty, where the goal wasn't just to kill, but to inflict the most suffering imaginable. So, what's the legacy of a ruler who thinks like this? It's not grand monuments or celebrated laws. The legal codes of Mesopotamia were often based on direct payback or compensation. The real innovation here was turning justice into pure psychological warfare. By weaponizing the most basic human need, a ruler could achieve a level of control that went beyond simple government. He didn't just command his subjects' actions, he colonized their minds with fear. The image of the man in the cage, the secret of the sealed wall, the remembered horror of a starved city, these were more effective at keeping people in line than any army. This kind of power wasn't built on loyalty. It was built on the dread of a slow, gnawing death. A ruler like this understood that to control a person's food is to control their life, their dignity, and their hope. His legacy wasn't written on stone. It was inscribed in the collective memory of his people, a ghost story of hunger and power whispered for generations. From the public cage of a single protester, to the silent tomb in a wall, to the weaponized famine of an entire city, using starvation as a punishment is a uniquely terrifying chapter in the history of power. It reveals a chilling truth, that the most effective forms of control often target our most basic vulnerabilities. The world has changed. Empires have risen and fallen. But the primal fear of hunger is as powerful as ever. Even today, starvation is still used as a weapon of war, and access to food is a source of conflict and control all over the globe. The story of this ancient archetype of tyranny isn't just a glimpse into a brutal past. It's a timeless reminder of how easily our highest ideals, like justice, can be twisted into our most terrifying tools of oppression. What do you think is the most horrifying punishment ever devised? Is there a historical horror we missed? Let us know in the comments below. If you thought the tale of a tyrant who starved his victims alive was horrifying, wait until you hear about the emperor who turned death into entertainment. A ruler who sat on a golden throne and laughed as men were thrown to wild beasts for sport. Click the link above to witness the reign of terror of the tyrant who forced his people to eat their own children. Thanks for watching.